Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. Chapter 8. When Aaron had mentioned fundraiser, followed by auction, I had pictured a fancy but frilly room filled with wealthy and uptown old people. Don't ask me why. But I had not expected the spectacular rooftop where we had been welcomed with a flute glass of the tastiest sparkling wine I had ever had the pleasure to drink. And surely, not the trendy and rather extravagant array of people of all ages and backgrounds in attendance. Who knew that the upper spheres of the Big Apple could be so colorful? Not that I had met everybody here. Actually, we had pretty much stuck to those somehow related to the football world. Which seemed natural after Aaron's revelation about his past and his family involvement in it. For the last hour, I had been introduced to a couple of coaches and team coordinators, a sportscaster, and a number of influential people whose positions I wasn't familiar with but that I nodded to like I knew exactly what they did. The only people we had talked to outside the sports bubble were a few entrepreneurs whose corporations, enterprises, and whatnot I had never heard of either. Every time we encountered a new group of people, Aaron introduced me as Catalina Martín, not adding any kind of label before or after my name. Which somehow helped me lose all that tension I had carried with me from the car drive and definitely aided with my newfound intention of trying to enjoy myself. This was my first time at an event like this one, and it would most likely be my last, so the least I could do was have fun. I already said so, but I'm so happy to see you, Aaron. Angela, a lady in her 50s who was clad in a dress that was probably worth 2 or 3 times my month's rent, smiled. Especially with someone on your arm. I felt my cheeks heat, so I distracted myself, taking a sip from my fancy flute glass. We had been chatting with her for a few minutes now. And the whole time, I had been silently watching the woman with fascination. Her elegance and poise had me in awe. And unlike more than a few people here, she had kind eyes. The fact that she was the mind behind tonight's event was only the cherry on top. So, tell me, Angela's lips inched higher, you'll be taking part in this year's auction too, I presume? I still haven't gotten the chance to check the final list. Yes, of course, Aaron answered from his post at my side. We hadn't had time to discuss what the deal with this whole me bidding for him was. By the time I had somehow pulled it together, we had been walking out of the elevator and into the party. We'd been quickly jumping from one small group of people to the next, so I hadn't had the chance to interrogate him about it. That's lovely to hear. She took a sip of her drink. I had my doubts, if I may be completely honest. Angela threw her head back and laughed. Last year's auction was intense. Very entertaining, to say the least. Aaron shifted by my side. Glancing at him, I could tell by the way his shoulders tensed that he was slightly uncomfortable with where the conversation was going. That piqued my curiosity. Angela continued, "Good thing you brought someone tonight. I'm sure it will keep the night alive." She turned to me. "Catalina dear, I hope you are ready for some fierce competition." I sensed Aaron shifting some more, which pushed my eyes to bounce from Angela to him. "Fierce competition?" I repeated, thinking of Aaron's words. "And that's what you'll be bidding on tonight, Catalina?" Me. And piecing together that perhaps that was exactly why I was here. Aaron's grip on his glass grew a little tighter. Nothing you should worry about. I watched him for a long moment, my curiosity doubling. Then, I turned to Angela, who was smiling with something that looked a lot like mischief. "Oh, but I'm not worried." A smile tugged at my lips. When I was going to bed was very similar to Angela's. "I'm always here for a good, entertaining story." I heard Aaron's resigned sigh from my side. Angela's grin widened. "I think I'm going to leave the honors to do that to Aaron." Then, she leaned and added in a hushed voice, "I'm sure his side of the story is all the more captivating. Especially the part nobody got to see." "Oh?" Before I could press for the details I was dying to hear, Angela's attention was caught by something a behind us. "Oh, there's Michael. If you'll please excuse me, I must go say hi." "Of course." Aaron nodded, body still all stiff, although he was probably glad Angela was moving on to someone else. "It was nice seeing you, Angela." "Yes," I gave her a polite smile. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Angela." "The pleasure was all mine, Catalina." She leaned in and air kissed my cheek. "Don't let him off the hook too easily." She winked and then walked away in the direction of the section of the rooftop where most people were gathered. A space filled with high tables that looked straight out of a design catalog and lines of wicker floor lamps that served as the only source of illumination. I turned to look at Aaron, finding that pair of blue eyes already on me. Pushing down the slight blush climbing up my neck, I cleared my throat. "I'm all ears, Blackford." I brought my glass to my lips and finally finished the sparkling wine I had been nursing for the last hour. "I think it's time you fill me in." Aaron seemed to think about his words for a moment. "As I'm sure you have already deducted, tonight's main event is a bachelor auction." "A bachelor auction," I repeated slowly. "Just your run-of-the-mill Saturday night activity, I assume." Aaron sighed. I rolled my index finger in the air. "Keep going. I want to hear the rest." "I don't think there's much else to say." He balanced his glass in his hand. "Well, forgive me, Blackford, but I think there must be plenty. Plus, I want to make sure I understand the concept of tonight's main event correctly." He shot me a glance. I suppressed my smile. "Right. So, during this auction of yours then, bachelors are acquired, you say?" "Correct. By, I assume, single women and men?" He nodded. "For an amount of money," I pointed out. "All in the name of charity, of course." Another nod. I tapped my finger on my chin. "I just wonder, no, never mind. It's stupid." Aaron shot me a tired glance. "Out with it, Catalina. If people are bidding buying all these bachelors." I watched his eyes narrow, exasperation written all over his fascia. "What happens next? When the bachelor is acquired, what is he acquired for?" Aaron's lips pressed in a flat line. I continued, "I mean, this is not like bidding for a boat or a Porsche. I guess you cannot take the bachelor for a ride." Okay, that sounded wrong. One could technically take someone for a ride. A certain sort of ride. Not that kind of ride, I rushed out, watching Aaron's expression change. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Not like a ride in a kind of way. I said that because one takes cars for a ride. Like, for a spin. But not men, not in that way. At least, I have never taken a man for a spin. I shook my head. I was making it worse, and the more I talked, the more Aaron's lips paled. You know what I mean. No, Aaron answered simply, bringing the glass to his lips and taking a sip. More often than not, I don't know what you mean, Catalina. He brought his hand to his right temple. Whoever offers the highest bid, which will be donated to the cause, gets to go on a date with the man in question. That's what the bachelor is acquired for. Hold up, what? A date? His brows knit. Yes, a date. Like a date, date? A date, date. Yes. You know, normally, two people who engage in a social appointment that often involves eating. Sometimes, other kinds of activities. He leveled me with a look. Like going for rides and spins. My lips parted. No, my mouth hung open. Had he just, hilarious. My cheeks heated. But I didn't have time to be embarrassed. Because that meant, so, do we have to, do it? What exactly? The date thing, I explained, lowering my voice so nobody could hear us. I know I'm only your fake bidder. So, do we have to do it anyway? Like, fake do it? Because you said I'm here to fake bid on you, so I just, Judging by Aaron's expression, there was something from all the things I had just said that he found particularly unpleasant. His throat worked slowly, looking as if he were swallowing something sour. Never mind. We'll figure it out later. I guess it's not important. What was important now was climbing out of this hole I had just dug for myself. So, do you take part in the auction every year? His eyes looked away for a heartbeat and then settled back on me. Ever since I moved to New York. This is my third time. And you, take all these bidders on dates? Okay, that wasn't exactly changing the topic of conversation, but a part of me wanted to know. Kind of. Of course. It's part of the deal. His earlier words came to mind. And you don't go back on your word. Exactly. That confirmation, that part of the deal bit, felt like a punch to the stomach. Back in my apartment, I had thought he'd sounded sincere when he told me that he wouldn't pull out of our deal. And I had felt, skeptical in a way, yes, but a part of me had also felt special. For lack of a better word. Like he was doing that for me and I could count on him. Perhaps because he knew how important it was for me, how much I needed him. But now, it seemed I had been wrong. This was the way Aaron was wired. It didn't have anything to do with me. And that made sense. The dumb thing to do had been thinking otherwise. And what do you do on these dates? I asked without thinking much of it, just so he wouldn't get a chance to see anything on my face. Where do you take them? Nothing special, he admitted with a sigh. The bachelor usually picks the activity and puts everything together. So, the 2 times I have participated, I have organized something at one of the animal shelters in the city. Spending some time there, volunteering and helping out, or even taking a few dogs for a walk. That was sweet, generous and kind, and way more than I would have ever expected from him, if my heart skipping a teeny tiny beat and catching me by surprise was any indication. I looked down, realizing my fingers were playing with the cuff around my wrist again. "That's where you took last year's bitter then?" "Yes." I could feel him silently asking me not to go there. Not to ask what Angela had mentioned earlier. "Oh," I said distractedly. "Speaking of last year, I had to ask you what happened during the auction?" Aaron's shoulders tensed, his face falling with resignation. "Not much." "Oh yeah?" I feigned surprise. "So, this fierce competition that Angela was talking about, the one I should not be scared of, doesn't ring any bell?" I watched his lips twitch and then bend in a pout. A pout. On Aaron's lips. Like no bells whatsoever? I pressed, getting acquainted with that expression of his for the first time ever. "Really none?" Aaron Blackford kept pouting, which in turn made me want to smile as wide as I could go. Not that I would. I suppressed the urge. "Oh, okay." I shrugged. "I'm sure getting mobbed by overexcited bidders is a common occurrence for you then, Blackford." I teased him because how can I not when he looked all mortified and ready to come out of his skin? Plus, he had teased me first anyway. "How did it happen exactly? Did they fling themselves at you? Or was it perhaps something subtler? Like hurling their money at your feet? Then their underwear?" If this man had the ability to blush, I would have bet all my money on those cheeks turning red any moment. "There's nothing to be embarrassed about. You are a big boy anyway." Aaron's eyebrow shot up his forehead. "Yes, we have stated that." He moved one step closer. I can fend for myself. "It didn't sound like that." My voice came out wobblier than I would have liked. Then, he took one more step, and something fluttered in my belly. Luckily he leaned closer, fixating his blue eyes on me. "You are here tonight." The flutter intensified. Which did not make any sense. I should have been, what? What should I have been feeling? "And the highest bid will be yours. Not anyone else's." My heart raced as I looked up at him, feeling overwhelmed in a way that wasn't strictly negative for how close he was standing. Aaron didn't step back. Instead, he continued talking, his voice coming closer and closer. "I will take care of the money. The donation will leave my pocket, not yours, so don't be shy with the bid as long as you beat everyone here. Hurl the money at my feet, if you will. Just make sure it's sure." He paused, and I felt my throat drying up at the one buying me. "Understood?" Those last few words seemed to echo in my mind, mingling with the fluttering sensation in my belly, making my skin tingle. I had to literally step back to force myself to process what he had just told me. I didn't think I'd be able to donate more than a few $100s on my own, so it was a good thing Aaron had concocted this plan with his checkbook and not mine. Which led me to consider one of two possibilities: Aaron Blackford truly cared about the cause, or he was wealthy enough not to care how much I donated in his name as long as I spared him a date. A date we were supposed to go on after this, if we followed the rules. but one that wouldn't be real. Because this wasn't real. It was all an act. "Well, a deal is a deal, Blackford," I told him with an awkward shrug, shoving away the strange and hazy thought of going on a date with Aaron to an animal shelter and seeing him play with a bunch of cute pups in his football gear with the poor La Muerte Dios. I have to stop all these mental images. Aaron's mouth opened, but before he could speak, a man approached us. He placed a hand on Aaron's shoulder. The latter turned at the contact and relaxed as soon as he took in the man by his side. I cannot believe my eyes. He patted Aaron's back firmly. Is this Aaron Blackford, gracing us with his company tonight? It must be my lucky day. Aaron snorted. It was a short and light noise, but I had heard it. It certainly isn't mine now that you are here too, he muttered, the right corner of his lips spent with a ghost of a lopsided smile. The Mana, who I assumed was or had been close to Aaron at some point, if his reaction was any indication, shook his head. Oh hell, that hurt. He brought a hand to his chest as the dark skin around his eyes wrinkled. How long has it been since I last saw your nasty face? Not long enough, if you ask me. Aaron's face, one that usually remained expressionless, opened up. His body seemed to loosen up as he faced the other man. How are you, TJ? I could hear the warmth in his voice. The familiarity. I've never been better, TJ, according to what Aaron had called. He nodded. Happy to be back, believe it or not. Damn, I never thought I'd miss the city. A chuckle left me at the exchange, as I was engrossed by this wholly new and different Aaron in front of me. One who was relaxed just enough to almost smiley and joke at Abelia, with who I assumed was an old friend. Buddha, oh, I see your lonely ass has company tonight. Hi. TJ straightened, a toothy grin taking over his face. He was probably around Aaron's age, give or take. His frame was just as wide and almost as tall. His brown eyes took me in with an interest that caught me by surprise. I didn't think it was interest in me, nope. He seemed to mirror my own fascination with Aaron having someone by his side. Aren't you going to introduce me, Big A? Where are your manners? He elbowed Aaron in the ribs. Aaron didn't even flinch at the friendly shove, remaining the immovable wall that he usually was. He was Big A after all, a nickname I'd make sure to query about later. Those lips that I had seen pouting just a few minutes ago opened, but they did too late. Fine. I can introduce myself to the lady, Aaron's friend said, not giving him a chance to do so himself. He stretched out his hand. Tyra James. A pleasure to make your acquaintance. I heard a noise coming from Aaron. Something very close to his earlier snort. TJ for those lucky enough to call me a friend. His grin widened. Taking his hand, I shook it with a light laugh. It's very nice to meet you. I'm Catalina Martín, but please, call me Lena. TJ's warm palm held my hand, head slanted. And what brings you here, Lena? I shot Aaron a quick glance, hesitating as to what to say. Then, my gaze returned to TJ, who waited for an answer that should have come far more easily than this. Smiling awkwardly and not having any idea what to say, I gave Aaron another sideways glance and opened my mouth. Aaron intervened. Finally. TJ and I were teammates in Seattle. He turned toward his friend. Catalina is here with me tonight. TJ's eyes stayed on me as he still waited in silence, clearly wanting me to elaborate on Aaron's introduction. All right, the whole Catalina is with me was vague and redundant, but I could definitely go with that. I cleared my throat. Yes, we came here together, Aaron and I. I waved my hand between us. He picked me up and then drove us here. In his car. Together. I nodded my head, seeing TJ's eyes light up with amusement, which made me uncomfortable. Which, in turn, made me itch to fill in the silence. I have a driver's license. But New York's traffic is scary. So, I have never dared driving in the city myself. Unnecessary, Lena. What am I doing? So, it's a really good thing Aaron picked me up. He doesn't look like he's scared of the traffic. Actually, it's him who can be a little scary sometimes. I chuckled, but it died off quickly. Not that I'm scared of him. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten in his car. Shut up, Lena. Shut up. I felt Aaron's laser eyes boring holes into my profile. TJ's too, but in a much less hostile way and a much more absorbed one. So, yeah, long story short, we came here together. Cringing internally, I reminded myself that this was what I deserved for lying in the first place. Aaron's friend chuckled, bringing both his hands to the pockets of his maroon tuxedo. TJ's eyes jumped between us, his gaze bouncing a couple of times from Aaron to me and then right back. Whatever he found, it was enough for him to nod his head with something that looked a lot like trouble. TJ hummed, shrugging his shoulders. Well, Aaron can be a scary motherfucker. He winked. Me, on the other hand? Just charm. I can tell. I smiled, just glad TJ had taken over. As I'm sure you already know, there is a bachelor auction going on tonight, and not only am I a bachelor myself, but TJ held both hands up, mischief written all over his face. Then, he peered at Aaron, as did I, and found him shooting daggers at Hema. But I have also signed up for the auction. And while I'm sure I'll be expensive, I can promise you, I am worth your TJ, Aaron cut off his friend. That won't be necessary. Aaron's body somehow shifted closer to me, my shoulder almost brushing his arm. That kernel that has been planted back in my apartment, that awareness of Aaron's body, the way his proximity was really hard to ignore, all of a sudden sprouted. I looked up at Aaron, finding his eyes already on me as his head leaned down. You can stop pitching yourself, he told his friend as his gaze snared mine. Then, I felt the ghost of a touch on the small of my back. Or so I thought, because it was gone far too quickly to be sure it had been real. Catalina is bidding on me tonight. I blinked. Trapped by Aaron's eyes and how close his words had fallen, almost grazing the skin of my left temple. You seem very sure of that, I heard TJ say, my eyes still locked with Aaron's. At least for someone who sounded more like her driver than her date. Aaron tore his gaze off me, landing on his friend. And I did the same. Something passed between the two men, and for a heartbeat, I felt like I should intervene. Then, TJ threw back his head and laughed, breaking whatever tension had seemed to take shape around us. "I'm just joking," big another cackle. "You should see your face. For a second there, I thought you were actually going to tackle me to the floor or something. You know that's not my style. I'd never go after a friend's girl." I'm nodding my mouth open to correct TJ, telling him I wasn't Aaron's girl. But the lines delimiting our deal were blurry, and I had no idea if I'd be inserting my foot in my mouth. I was his fake date and fake bidder, but did that mean I was his fake girl too? Damn, we definitely needed to talk this out before Spain. This test run was proving to be far more challenging than what I had expected. "He wasn't going to tackle you, TJ." Aaron's body seemed to relax with a sigh, somehow shifting and angling toward me. His chest brushed my arm just lightly, making me feel the warmth of his body. "I see that's something that hasn't changed," Aaron muttered. "How hilarious you think you are." "Come on," I intervened. "He was just teasing you." Just how I would have if I wasn't still feeling all tingly and weird and I could focus on something besides the point where my shoulder grazed Aaron's chest. It was harmless fun. "See? Listen to your girl. I was just pushing your buttons." TJ's smile persisted, lighting up his whole face. "Just like old times." A question popped up in my head then. Why had TJ felt the need to push Aaron like that? Was this how they were with each other? It must have been. Aaron had gotten territorial in a matter of seconds right out of nowhere. "Oh, speaking of old times," TJ said, his face somehow taking a somber quality. "I heard about Coach, and I'm sorry, man. I know you guys don't talk, but he is still here. It's okay." Aaron cut his friend off. I could feel the tension emanating off his body. The shift. I could sense how uncomfortable and on guard he was all of a sudden. "Thanks, but there's nothing you have to be sorry for." I looked up at him, finding him pinning his friend with a warning in his eyes. "All right," TJ complied, his face taking on a somber edge. "I'm sure I don't need to tell you because you have lived through it yourself, but time doesn't wait for you to make amends, man. Time waits for nobody." TJ stared back at his friend with something I failed to identify. An emotion that I wanted to understand where it was coming from. How and why did it affect Aaron, and what did it have to do with that man TJ had called Coach? I convinced my pops to come tonight. I signed him up for the auction. That mischievous smile was back. It's time he gets out there and starts living his life again. He's very excited. Before Aaron or I could say anything, Aaron, because he still looked a little lost himself, and me because I was trying to understand why TJ turned to me. "So, Lena, if you get tired of his boring face, just know there are not one, but two James men available on the stage. I'll make sure to remember that." I smiled at him, trying to lighten my tone. "Although I think I have my hands full with this one." I felt Aaron's eyes on me, warming up my face. Why did I say that? "Which reminds me," TJ said. "The auction will be starting soon, and I was sent to steal this ugly bastard away. So, if you don't mind, Lena, We should get going. Oh, of course. I let my gaze roam around, realizing how most of the people had shifted closer to the stage, which was at one of the ends of the rooftop. A wave of nervousness washed over me. You guys should go. My smile turned tight. I can spare the company for a little while. I lowered my voice. I'm sure you know how chatty he can get. I pointed at Aaron. So, my ears can use the break. TJ cackled again. Are you sure you want to spend your money on him, Lena? I'm telling you. Aaron glared at his friend. Quit it already, would you? Okay, okay. I was just saying, man. TJ's hands went up. I chuckled, but it came out a little strangled because Aaron had eaten the distance that separated us, my arm fully coming in contact with his chest, and all of a sudden, I didn't want him to go. My eyes landed on Aaron, who was looking down at me with an apology shining in the blue of his eyes. I must have looked and sounded as nervous as I felt if Aaron was feeling bad for leaving me to myself for a little while. I shook my head, telling myself to stop being silly. Yes, I think I'm sure, TJ, I answered TJ's initial question while I searched Aaron's face. Go. I'll be fine on my own. He seemed to hesitate, not moving from my side, and I felt bad for making him feel like he needed to babysit me. Don't be silly, Big A. I'm fine, and you have to go. I absently patted Aaron's chest, my palm freezing on the spot. Aaron looked down at my hand very slowly, just as electricity shot up my arm. I retrieved my hand immediately, not having the slightest idea why I had done that besides the fact that the touch had come naturally to me. Aaron had felt bad for leaving me alone, probably because I had looked like someone had kicked my puppy and I had automatically tried to comfort him with physical contact. A friendly pat. But we weren't friends, and I shouldn't forget that. I cleared my throat. Go, seriously. I lifted my empty glass in the air, feeling my cheeks heat for the umpteenth time tonight. I'll busy myself with getting a refill. I can stay a little longer, explain to you how the bidding works. His voice was oddly gentle. It made me uncomfortable. Get you another drink too. The urge to touch him again to reassure him I'd be fine was back. I suppressed it. I think I can figure it out on my own, I told him softly. It couldn't be all that complex. What if I still want to tell you about it? My urge to antagonize him to attempt to get us back to how we were supposed to be somehow pushed me to rise on my tiptoes. I leaned in, so only he could hear me. I'll figure it out. And if I don't, I swear, I will try not to spend all your money on something stupid, like a yacht or Elvis's used underpants. But I make no promises, Blackford. I leaned back, expecting to find him rolling his eyes or scoffing. Anything that would indicate I had succeeded and this was still USA the Aaron and Lena I was comfortable with. Instead, I was welcomed by blue eyes that were full of something that churned and made me uneasy. He hit it with a blink. Okay. That was the only answer he gave me. No snarky comeback. No scolding comment about how unfunny and inappropriate it would be to spend his money on a boat. No appalled glance after mentioning Elvis's knickers. Nothing, except okay. Okay then. All right, let's go, TJ said, encouraging Aaron to take a step away from me. I'll see you later, Lena. He winked. Yeah, I mumbled and then shook my head and tried to look like I wasn't as confused as I felt. Woo those flocks of bitters, guys. I cheered with my fist in the air. TJ openly laughed, and Aaron remained looking at me with something I hoped was not regret after asking me to do this whole fake dad thing for him. Both men proceeded to turn and then walked away side by side, the sight too enticing for me not to follow them with my gaze. So, I stood there and watched them. I saw how TJ leaned into my fake date's side and said something probably just for him. Aaron's head never turned, his step never ceased, his only reaction was a shake of his raven head. Then, he shoved TJ away with a force I was sure would have sent anybody else flying. Another one of TJ's cackles resonated in the air. And I found myself grinning as I watched them stride off. Thinking about how seeing Aaron around all these people who belonged to a life I hadn't had the slightest clue existed, one that he had kept well guarded, just like he did everything else, was as outlandish as it was fascinating. My hand rose of its own accord, catching me by surprise. 1,500 for the lady in the beautiful midnight blue gown, Angela, who had been in charge of conducting the auction for the last hour, called from behind the microphone stand with a rather shocked smile. My throat dried up, making it impossible for me to swallow my own audacity. I was a despicable human being because I had just bid a dizzying amount of money on someone. A man. A bachelor no less. One that wasn't Aaron. The seemingly sweet and old man I had just bid on gave an enthusiastic cheer from the center of the stage, relief taking over his wrinkled face. He bowed in my direction. As much as I felt horrible and guilty and honestly a little terrified, I couldn't help but smile at the man in return. Willing my eyes to stay put and not to jump to Aaron, who was a few feet to the left of the stage, waiting for his turn to be auctioned, I tried to shake off the deserved sense of guilt that had settled between my shoulders. Chill. I needed to chill. Someone else would bid higher. The old man just needed a little push to get this going. And that was exactly what I had done. Or what I had found myself doing after the 5 minutes of awkward and heartbreaking silence following that sweet-looking man stepping on the stage. I had recognized that smile immediately. It had been the same playing on TJ's lips. Ladies and gentlemen, 1,600 for Patrick James. Angela's voice came through the speakers. No hands rose in the air. Not even one. Damn it. Who I had assumed was TJ's pops, Patrick, stood on the stage with his gray hair, suspenders, and back a little curved with age, looking completely out of place when compared with every other man who had been up for grabs or bids, whatever the night. He smiled, satisfied enough with just being there. With just having one bidder, which happened to be me. And that was bad, bad, bad. Because I was here to bid on Aaron. Not for a man that, according to Angela's introduction, was a widower who was looking for a second chance not in love, but in living life. Jesus, I'd take him on a date if I had to. I hadn't been able to stand there and do nothing when a man who reminded me so much of my past abuelo for some damn reason, a man I knew was TJ's pops, waited for someone, for anybody, to bid on him. This was a fundraiser, for Christ's sake. Weren't people supposed to be donating their money? That was what I had done. Only perhaps I had technically bid with money that wasn't mine. I grimaced. Don't look at Aaron, Lena. Don't. I'd pay for the donation with my own funds. The most pressing issue was, could I bid for 2 bachelors? Shit. I really hoped so. Angela continued pitching the sweet man on the stage. Mr. James has an affinity for candlelit dinners, and he is a believer of fulfilling his own destiny. Patrick's head nodded. No hands were visible. Mirda, Mirda, Mirda. I couldn't look at Aaron. Not even when I could feel both his eyes boring holes in my profile. I'd bet he was fuming. But I'd apologize later. I'd explain. He is a sailing aficionado, an activity he picked up ever since his grandson bought him a beautiful sailboat. One that he intends on putting to good use on his date. Out of the corner of my eye, I tracked down around 5 women who were in the mood for a sailing date placing their bids. Relief filled me so instantly that I felt about 10 pounds lighter. My gaze searched for Aaron then. And it didn't take me any time to find him. My eyes seemed to know exactly where he was standing. My breath caught for a second. Stupid, stupid tuxedo. I had been so wrapped up in what was happening that he, looking all imposing and striking on top of that stage, caught me completely off guard. The auction for Patrick continued in the background, my eyes making their way to Aaron's. They were narrowed. Probably assessing what the hell that had been. Other than that, he looked fine. Neutrally stoic. Just like he usually did. Except for the distracting tux that hung off his body like a glove. Finding a little comfort in the fact that Aaron didn't seem to be completely furious, I shrugged my shoulders and mouthed, "I'm sorry, okay?" Aaron's eyes narrowed further, and then his head shook lightly. "You're not," I watched his lips enunciate. I huffed. "I am," I mouthed back. I was very, very sorry, and he shook his head again, disbelief in his eyes. "You're not." Aggravated by the words Aaron had mouthed twice even though he had every right to and I had sort of anticipated it, I threw both my hands up with irritation. Jesus, this Mana 1900 for the lady in midnight blue. Angela's voice reached my ears. "Wait, what number?" I flinched, then dropped my hands to my sides, and stuck them there. Looking at Angela for confirmation of what I had done, even if this time accidentally, I found her pointing in my direction. Shit. Returning my gaze to Aaron, I watched him roll his eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. Grimacing, I sent him a tight smile that I hoped communicated how really sorry I was and hoped Patrick had another one of those boats. Because I needed somebody else to bid on the old widower man. Angela announced the next sum, not obtaining an immediate answer. The guilt returned, together with a pinch of embarrassment. Which pushed me to pin Aaron with a serious look as I mouthed again, "Sorry," very slowly and methodically. Making sure he understood the sentiment behind it. Aaron's eyes held mine, one of those deadpan expressions in place. "I swear." I made my lips form the silent words in a very exaggerated manner. Then, I curled my lips into a sad face, keeping the rest of my body still just so I wouldn't accidentally bid on any more bachelors. I am really sorry, I mouthed like a total idiot. And I was. Sorry, that was. Although a bit of an idiot too. A few heads turned and sent me a fair share of weird glances, but I didn't let that deter me, and I kept my lips bent down, telling Aaron with my eyes that I was sorry. Although, if you asked me, it was on him for bringing me of all people to do something that I was clearly not qualified for. The sight must have been truly something because before I knew what was happening, Aaron's shoulders shook a couple of times, his stance broke, and one of his hands went to the back of his neck as his head dipped. I couldn't see his face, so I had no clue of what was going on. All money was on him bursting in frustration and anger and turning into the Hulk. And just when I was about to really start worrying, he lifted back that raven-haired head of his and revealed something I would never have bet on. The biggest, widest, and handsomest smile was splitting his expression, wrinkling the corners of his eyes, transforming him into a man my eyes couldn't take in fast enough. A man I had never seen before. One who was beginning to make it really, really hard for me to hate. My own face lit up at the sight. I felt my cheeks tense with my answering green one just as big, just as wide, just as unexpected. And then Aaron started laughing. His head tilted back, and his shoulders shook with laughter. And he was doing it on a stage, in front of all these people and in front of me, as if he didn't have a care in the world. Neither did I, apparently. Because in that moment, the only thing I could focus on, think of, care about was Aaron's unexpected and glorious smile and laughter. So much that my fingers itched to pull out my phone and snap a photo so I had proof that this had happened. So I could revisit the momenta in which Aaron Blackford, someone who had the power to irritate me with nothing but a word, had fucking lit up the place with a smile he had kept locked up from me ever since I met him whenever I wanted. And how messed up was that? Or furthermore, how messed up was it that I didn't even care about it being messed up in the first place? Before I could recover from Ida the effect of something as mundane as a smile, but that was so rare in the man my eyes couldn't stop looking at. He was striding toward the center of the stage. Angela's voice left the speakers. Lovely. I'm sure Patrick and his lucky bidder, the lady with the blue fan, will enjoy whatever he has prepared. Too caught up in my fake dad who knew how to really smile, I hadn't noticed someone bidding for Patrick. And last but not least, we have Aaron Blackford. Ladies, gentlemen, let's start at 1500 and remember Angela's eyes widened, and then she chuckled. Oh, I guess I don't need to remind you to please place your bids on our last bachelor tonight if you want to contribute to the cause. Looking around, I found the reason why. More than 10 different people had their arms already in the air. I love seeing your involvement, Angela continued with a knowing smirk. 1500 for the lady in red. Turning, I located this involved with the cause lady in red. She was in the first row of people, and she looked about 20 years older than me, give or take. And while I didn't want to be judgmental or superficial, only by looking at her, I could imagine how generous her donation would be. My gaze shot back to the stage, clashing against Aaron's. That grin had been wiped off, his features now hard and empty. I felt a pang of disappointment I had no time to inspect. I had one job tonight, and I was failing at it. For the second time, readying myself, I released a breath. I couldn't let myself be distracted by something as wonderfully shocking yet pointless as Aaron's ability to smile or laugh. 1700? Angela announced, and I gestured with my hand to place my bid. Too late. For the lady in red. Lady in red had beaten me and around another 5 or 6 hands to it again. A quick look at Aaron's tense shoulders told me he felt as unhappy about it as I was. I squared back my shoulders, focusing on Angela and her next words. "Wonderful," she said into the microphone. "Let's raise this up, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Blackford is after all in high demand. How about 19 Huna?" My hand shot up in the air, keeping an eye on Lady in Red, whose bid had been faster than mine. Again. Angela chuckled and pointed at Lady in Red again, acknowledging her bid. To my shock and surprise, Lady in Red turned in my direction with a smug smile on her face. My eyes narrowed. Oh, hell number. This wasn't about charity. This had just gotten personal. Angela announced the next amount, and I launched my hand in the air with impressive speed, so much that I almost pulled a muscle, but Angela's next words made up for possible injuries. "For the lovely lady in midnight blue." Angela smiled from behind the stand. I returned it, feeling a weird burn in the pit of my stomach, matching the one on my shoulder. Next bid was called, and it was mine again. Ha! Suck that, Lady in Red. As if she had heard me, her head whirled around. Her eyes narrowed to very thin slits, and her lips pursed. The woman whipped her blonde hair back and dismissed me. I knew in that moment that I had been right to assume this was personal. This lady was after Aaron. And I wasn't going to let her get my own and not mine, I corrected myself. Just Aaron. I wasn't going to let her get Aaron. The call for the next bid came, and before Angela's words were out, it was already mine. Lady in Red sent me a look that could have frozen the sun on a heated New York summer day, and I was tempted to stick my tongue out, but after reminding myself that would be about 100 ways of inappropriate, I limited myself to smirking. Lady in Red and I battled for about 5 or 6 more rounds. Each of them becoming brisker, our arms flashing up faster, the looks we sent each other growing icier. My breath quickened, and the skin of my face felt like I had just sprinted across Central Park like I was chasing the freaking ice cream truck. But so far, it was worth it because Aaron remained mine. Not mine. Just, whatever. I had been so absorbed by this duel we had going on that I had almost forgotten about the man on the stage. I had barely checked on him since the bidding bloodshed started. Just as I was about to turn my attention to Aaron, my hand rose in the air one more time, as high as the ridiculous amount of money we had reached, and this time, it did alone. Angela waved in my direction. "Going once for the lady in midnight blue," she called. My heart thumped against my chest harder. I caught a glimpse of a gray-haired man beside a tight-lipped lady in red, who stood with her arms crossed in front of her chest. "Going twice," Angela continued as I watched the man whisper something in Lady in Red's ear, to which she just sighed and nodded. Reluctantly. Come on, come on, come on. Aaron is almost mine. And sold to the very lovely and very passionate lady in the midnight blue gown. Angela closed the bidding with a wink. I felt the celebratory holler climbing to my throat as my head finally turned in Aaron's direction. I wanted to do a little victory dance. To throw my hands in the air too. I also felt the urge to shout a couple of inappropriate words, which, in hindsight, I would have realized was extremely stupid and I would have immediately regretted it. But as Aaron came into view, that whirling emotion that had been too loud a moment ago, fell silent on its own. He wasn't even smiling. He simply looked at me. The disappointment at not finding that grin I had gotten a glimpse of earlier returned, and I wondered if it would be this way from today on. Me searching for Aaron's smile and him keeping it locked away again. I swallowed that up, shoving those stupid thoughts out of my head. My lips tugged up regardless of all that, and I gave a half-hearted cheer. To which Aaron simply nodded, looking like he did when he had something in his mind. Something that bothered him. Frowning, I watched Aaron's long legs climb down the stage and walk to my side, all the while ignoring how the way he wasn't even celebrating with me made me feel. Instead, I focused on keeping what I hoped looked like a genuine smile in place. The blue-eyed man I had just bought for a date that would never happen stopped in front of me. He dipped his head, his chin almost touching his collarbone. I waited, but he didn't say anything. I reached for something to say and came up empty-handed, returning the silence. That awareness I had been familiarizing myself with far too rapidly for my own good and comfort came rushing back, raising the short hairs on my arms. It hit me then how weird, how strange, and how shocking in many different ways it was that we'd found each other in this situation. How tonight didn't even seem real. Shifting on my feet under the weight of Aaron's gaze, I swallowed. One more time, I wasn't capable of taking in this heavy silence that settled between us. I hope you come with a boat, Blackford, I finally said, my voice sounding a little off. Otherwise, I might regret not sticking with Patrick. Aaron's eyes didn't waver. They held mine. And just as they did, I watched how they warmed up in just a heartbeat. The skin around them wrinkling only slightly with the smile I now knew he refused to give me. I felt something shift in my chest. Something very subtle and small that I almost missed, but it didn't help the pace of my breath is still all over the place from the auction to return to normal. He took one step closer. Sometimes, I'm convinced you enjoy making me suffer. His usually deep voice sounded hushed, giving to his words an afterthought quality. Oh. I frowned. My mouth opened, but I still struggled for a few more moments. Okay, you have every right to be pissed, but in all fairness, we're even because you should have warned me it would get that intense. I laughed awkwardly. If I had known, I would have added a ninja star or two to my outfit. They would have definitely come in handy with Lady in Red. Aaron towered over my short height, quiet and still gazing at me in that way that made me shift on my feet again. Silence settled between us once more, bringing to my attention that we were no longer surrounded by the crowd that had gathered in front of the stage. Instead, the murmur of voices accompanied with a mellow tune came all the way from the other side of the rooftop. Aaron broke the silence, saying, "Dance with me."